Thanks, friends. There's our reminder that we are recording this evening's session. And before we get officially started with our programming tonight, I just want to make an acknowledgement that VocalEye is broadcasting to you all this evening from the unceded, ancestral, and occupied territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And as we're all joining over Zoom tonight, I invite you to think about what that means to you. And of course, in my own heart and soul, I felt that it wasn't appropriate to honor these folks and to not make mention and honor what has happened in this past week in Kamloops. So for those of you who aren't aware, there was a residential school site where they uncovered a mass grave of 215 children that attended that school. Which is an atrocity and a reminder of the past and current genocides committed against Indigenous peoples throughout Canada, North America, and likely throughout the world. So I invite you to join me in honoring the memories of these lives that were not only lost, but stolen, and to, take a moment and acknowledge the lands that you're settled on. So thank you for giving me the space to say that, because it's been all over our local news and it's weighed quite heavily on my own heart. So I'm Amy, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for VocalEye Descriptive Arts Society. So welcome to our virtual VocalEye presentation, number 46, Imagine van Gogh, is what we're witnessing here tonight. And I just want to quickly acknowledge and thank those of you who have made donations to VocalEye. We offer this programming free of charge to the community, but we are, it costs money to do this. So if you're in a position to make a contribution, we would greatly appreciate it. We'll post a link in the chat. But also just a thank you for those who have made contributions, and an acknowledgement there, and a reminder that it's not obligatory, folks. So it's an offering, and thank you to those who have made contributions. And I also love to just remind folks, especially since we've got new folks in the space tonight, that we do something different every week. So sometimes we've got a live described play. Sometimes we've got a virtual art tour like we're experiencing this evening. So we do different things each week. And that's kind of the fun of being in this virtual space together, is there's always something new to check out. That being said, next week, which would be June the 9th, we're going to explore opera through movies, which is going to be super interesting. It's like an entry into opera, and community member and opera singer Julia Bonnet is going to join us for that. And then on June the 16th, which happens to be my birthday, I requested that Kim Kilpatrick come back and do an encore presentation of Flying in the Dark. She did that for the CCB in Toronto, and she's a member of our community and an artist, and I would love to have her back to share with us Flying in the Dark. And then on June the 23rd, really, I'm excited about everything, but really excited about this. This is something that's kind of new to us. We're calling it the art of making the invisible visible. And we're going to have a couple of scientists join us, because we're taking a look at some NASA photos from the Chandra X-ray Observatory. So if you've ever been interested in what space looks like, space photos, that's going to be kind of cool. Okay, friends, let's get into talking about what we're going to share tonight. So we've got some special guests and some returning folks. Actually, they're all returning folks. Again, for those of you who are new this evening, we're going to hear from our longtime VocalEye describer, Eileen, and our intern, who is now sort of branched into our crowdsourced description expert, Jiten, who's going to join us again later on in the programming. And I'm going to welcome into the space in this moment Jessa, who's our visual arts programmer, because we're going to just kick off what it is we're going to talk about tonight. So Jessa, what is Imagine van Gogh? Set this up for us, what we're going to experience.
Yeah, well, hello everyone, near and far. So tonight we're going to have a virtual experience of an exhibition that's been touring Canada called Imagine van Gogh. And it's from France, and it's a show that takes dozens and dozens of Van Gogh's iconic paintings, and it creates an immersive environment that people step into this room with these angled walls, and there's projections all over the walls, all over the floors. There's music involved, and it becomes this all immersive visual experience of the paintings moving and flowing and fading around you. And so a number of our team members went to the show, we took photos, we took notes, we talked about our experiences. And so I'll be sharing with you a few highlights from what it was like to be there. And then for the second half of the images we want to show you tonight, we'll be bringing in Eileen and Jiten and also Amy as well to talk about their experiences and some crowdsourced descriptions of a few key examples of Van Gogh's work.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with the crowdsourcing project, we started this several weeks back and put an invite out to the world for people to in the community to ask us about what kinds of visual art that they had always wanted to have described. And a lot of folks asked for Van Gogh's work. So we thought this was an apropos time to introduce that. And then of course, on the flip side, then you take these Van Gogh paintings and you put them out to the world and say, hey folks, interested in describing? And the interesting part of that is that as a listener of description, I get a different lens. So we're going to share a collection of these crowdsourced around two particular pieces to be able to just sort of get an all around experience from different lenses, which is totally cool. Good stuff, Jessa. I'm really excited about tonight, and talk to me a little bit about your preparation in curating this particular event for us.
So I went to the show and I spent about an hour there looking at everything, taking it all in. And then the images that I'll be showing you tonight highlight some of the different kinds of experiences. Like at some points in the exhibition, you had a patchwork effect with multiple pieces of paintings all around you. And sometimes they took one painting and they projected pieces of one painting all around you. So I'll be showing you a couple examples of the different kinds of experiences that people had in those spaces. And then we also wanted to include Starry Night because it was a painting that many people in the VocalEye community had requested. So we'll talk about that a bit later. And we'll also talk about one of his self-portraits because I also want to talk about who he was as a person and a lot of the myths and stories of the tortured artist that a lot of people think of when they think of who Van Gogh was. So it's going to be an interesting, diverse approach to looking at him from that Imagine Van Gogh exhibition, but also looking at individual paintings and then using our different crowd descriptions to look at them from different perspectives.
Right. And for folks who are in the Metro Vancouver area, how long is this exhibition going to be in town?
So it's there until the summertime, and you can book tickets in the during COVID, they give us, or the COVID period, they give us a certain time where you're invited to come to the show. So I went at a certain time, and then you can stay as long as you want. So if you look for Imagine Van Gogh Vancouver on Google, it'll take you, probably the first link there will be the ticket website, and you can see what time slots are available over the summer. And you could take a friend and they could describe some things to you, and you can experience a lot. As you'll hear, there's also music involved. So it's quite a multi-sensory experience.
And I think the exhibition goes till the I want to say it's the 29th of August, but it's to the end of August. And we will make sure that we circulate that link in the email that goes out, so you don't have to feverishly Google it if you're interested in witnessing it in person. So that's going to be some interesting stuff to explore tonight. And again, as Jessa says that you'll see in these photos, we of course are going to describe everything as we always do. And Jessa's going to bring her expertise as a as a professional. What do I even call you? I mean, for VocalEye, you're the visual arts programmer, but what are your actual credentials, Jessa, so that we know where you're coming from?
Thanks. So I have a master's in art history, and I've spent about the last 15 years teaching in universities and also art museum settings. So I do a lot of teaching around art history and contemporary art. So I guess I'm an art historian or an art lecturer. So I wear many hats. And so this is kind of a public version of that. So you don't need to go to a museum to experience art, and you can do it through Zoom like this together.
Yeah, one of the silver linings, if we could say, of the pandemic experience is the ability to bring us all in this platform together, from, as Mo points out, from the UK, and sometimes we have folks joining us from Japan and from lots of folks from the States and across Canada. So whether you're joining us from the present or the future or the way distant future, 8 hours in the future, we appreciate you being in this space. We're going to kick off our programming in just a few minutes. We always just wait until 7 o'clock Pacific time, just to make sure that that folks who want to get in the space can get in the space. Jessa, any other things that you'd like to just set up for us in terms of what we're going to experience tonight? Any foundations you'd like to lay? Teases?
Ask questions anytime as things go along. Van Gogh may have been someone that you've heard of and you're wondering about, and so questions are always welcome as we go. And I'm hoping that it'll give you a lot of different ways of thinking about one of the many famous artists in the world. So Amy always asks lots of questions as well. I love when art is more of a dialogue rather than just a lecture or something.
A presentation or a lecture. Yeah.
So art comes alive when we talk about it and we think about it and we ask questions. So no question is a bad question. Everything is welcome.
Yeah. And again, that's a reminder and an invite to those in the community who are on the line with us tonight. If you need further unpacking or have questions about Van Gogh, that's what this space is about, for us to learn together and share together and grow together and be exposed to different artistic mediums, because I think that's also one of the interesting things about this platform and the variety of stuff. It's like, when we were talking about opera coming up next week, I don't know anything about opera. And the truth is that I probably have experienced more of it than I know that I have, because the entry point for next week is through the movies. So we're going to examine, really iconic movie films and how they've used opera arias in them as either soundtrack or set or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, like now, I do remember there was opera in this. So the really exciting thing about being in this space is that we have such a variety of arts, which is really reflective of the real world, and all the kind of art exhibits that we can experience out in the world. So I appreciate everybody joining us for those experiences. Jessa, with your relationship with VocalEye, for folks who don't know, how is it that you that original connection happened between VocalEye and yourself?
So long before COVID happened, at the Vancouver Art Gallery, our public programs department invited Steph to come and train the gallery program team how to do descriptions. So she took the way the VocalEye models descriptions with theater and adapted it to ways that we could do it with exhibition spaces. So for about a year, we had monthly tours where we had members of the VocalEye community come out and volunteers came out, and it was pretty amazing to see not only people from the blind and partial sighted community engaging with art that they might never experience unless they came on one of our tours, but also you saw people who have sight tuning in and listening, and even mentioning that describing and experiencing something slowly even helps them experience something, because many people walk past an artwork very, very quickly. It's like, oh, I like it, I don't like it, move on. And there's so much to see when you do maybe go to a museum. So I think this kind of slow looking and spending longer times with something is beneficial to everybody, no matter what kind of senses we use.
Yeah, it's certainly, I certainly get the benefit of the description, and with my partial sight, I love getting the experience of other folks. I love knowing what they see, but I also love knowing what the painting or whatever it is we're looking at, what that makes them feel. And when I think about Van Gogh, I have had the privilege of seeing those paintings as a sighted person. And now in my memory, and it's been a good 15 years since I've lost my sight. So in my memory, it starts to fade a little bit. But just before we get started, share with me what you would call his style.
Okay, so he's considered modern art, and modern art has a lot of different movements. Even Impressionism is part of modern art. So modern art often has lots of brush strokes and colors and very individual styles that the artists are experimenting with, kind of breaking the rules from always being so realistic, the way that art was in Europe for hundreds of years. And so we call him post-impressionist because he came about especially in the 1880s until he died in 1890. So he came about just after Degas and Monet and Renoir and the Impressionists were shaking things up in Paris with their paintings of modern life. So he didn't call himself post-impressionist, but art history calls him that. So he's part of a time in history when a lot of artists were trying to paint in ways that were breaking free from what photos look like and from what the eye perfectly sees, but rather using color that is more emotional or brush strokes that are more creative. So a lot of experimenting was happening during that time, and in many ways he was too experimental for a lot of people. And then after he died, in the century and a half since, well, century and 30 years since, we really see that he's become a long-lasting favorite for a lot of people when they look at 19th century art. But during his time, sometimes it's hard being the pioneer in some of these art movements.
He's pretty progressive, was he?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've got a really good setup as to what we're going to experience, and I've got 7:00 on my Pacific time dial here. So that signals to me that folks are in the room that are meant to be here. And of course, I'm glad we gave them the extra time, because there are still a few folks that I can, I have co-host privilege, so I can hear who's coming in the room. And we had about 6 people join us in the last minute. So without further ado, Jessa, I would love it for you to just lead us into this process. I know you have probably a little spiel, and then we're going to get right into some of these images and sharing those with friends. So
I'll set the stage for you. The first few images I want to show you are giving you a sense of what that exhibition space felt like. And then we'll move into looking at a few individual paintings. So to start with, imagine that you are coming with me into 2 rooms, actually. And Rick, if you can bring up the first image, actually, that will basically be the first room that I experienced. After you get your ticket, you come into the lineup, and with COVID, they would have everyone go in groups, and you could go with your family, and you could move through the first room, just making sure that you have lots of space between you and the next group. The first room was big, and this exhibition is set up in a convention center. So they just took a huge giant room, put black drapes everywhere. You can't even see the ceiling. The ceiling is so high up, but the room was very, very dark. And they had large text panels that were hanging from the ceiling, but they were hanging at eye level. So you enter this dark room, and there's these deep red and deep purple and deep green text panels, and they're huge. If you stretch your arms out to both sides, that's about how wide the text panels were. So they're these big dark red or dark blue or dark green text panels with white writing on them and a white frame. And you'd move through the space, reading about his life, reading about the team that made the projection exhibition. And so it was kind of the intro space, this kind of dark and dramatic space that had all these text panels. And as someone who loves art, it was a lot of reading. And I also noticed that if you were in a wheelchair, it'd be really hard to read them because they were all at standing level. But it was the room that sort of set the tone for who he was and his life in France and his painting style and his inspiration. And as we go through the presentation today, I'll share a little bit more about him with you. But
and just from an accessibility perspective, I imagine there isn't an audio guide for this either.
Unfortunately not. It definitely is a space that you need to be able to read English or French. You need to be able to read white writing on a colored surface, and the darkness with this was quite intense, and so the spotlight, the pool of light at every text panel was dramatic for those who have sight, but it would have probably been quite difficult to navigate if low lighting is difficult for people. So it's not a show that was designed with accessibility in mind, I'm sorry to say, but I'm hoping I can help make it more accessible for the community this way.
That's right. That's why you're here tonight.
Yeah. So you'd move through this space from one dramatically lit text panel to the next. And then by the end of the room, something that you notice is the sound of classical music. So that was
just a snapshot, right?
Yeah, just a teaser of a piano piece by Eric Satie. And as we send out the follow-up email to everyone, the newsletter or email to everyone who's come tonight, we're going to send you a link to a playlist on Spotify that's actually the soundtrack of this exhibition, because classical music with choir pieces and piano pieces was flooding the space with music. And I was like, what is that sound? And then you enter, well, you leave the darkness and you enter into the next image that I want to show you. So you can imagine music in the background. And that was just a tiny teaser that we wanted to share with you. And so coming into this next image that we have in front of us, I'll describe the room a bit to you. It was a very large room with white walls, white floors, but then they were full of color because of cameras, dozens and dozens and dozens of cameras that are high above in the darkness, and they're all projecting onto the walls, onto the floor, and they move with the music. So sometimes they move all together, sometimes it's a bit nauseous because things are swaying a little, but the floor and the walls are always filled with different elements from his paintings. But what was interesting about the room was it was not a large square. It wasn't a typical rectangle or a typical square. It was actually, if you can picture a big square room, but all the corners have been folded in. So actually it felt like the walls were like zigzags rather than 4 square walls. And so there was actually 12 zigzag walls all around us. And then a cube, a white cube in the middle, which also was full of projections.
And so when you say huge in terms of scale, like how tall are these walls?
Oh yeah, these walls. So in the many of the images I show you, I'll mention that there's people looking at the walls, looking at the floor, and just for scale, the people are so small. So each wall is probably as tall as 4 or 5 adult people. So it was several stories high. The walls were massive, maybe 2 or 3 stories high, or if you imagine your own body, maybe 4 or 5 of your own body stacked.
It almost feels like you're walking amongst high rises.
You really do. You're tiny. You're tiny in this immersive experience, and Van Gogh's paintings are blown up around you. And so I walked from corner to corner just to see how wide some of these walls were. And it took me like 30 footsteps to walk from one corner to the other. So very, very wide walls, very, very tall walls, and they're all crooked to make sort of this zigzag shape room. This room around you that's full of zigzag walls.
Bunch of 90-degree angles.
Yeah, there were some, but it definitely did not feel like a typical rectangular square room. So that, of course, disorients you. And then you're swept into this music, but also the moving paintings and sometimes photographs from his life. But it felt like you were immersed in a world of color, and you were very small, and Van Gogh's paintings were suddenly very, very large.
And just talk a bit about this idea of being like confused in the space. That's done on purpose, right?
Oh yes, sometimes artists or exhibition creators, they want to interrupt kind of the normal way that we move through space or that we think or we see, and surprise us or make us feel very small. So usually a painting is big enough to hold in your hands if you have a Van Gogh painting in front of you, but suddenly we are like ants. Basically our size is suddenly so tiny compared to the landscapes or the paintings around us. So playing with size, making someone feel like an ant is a really unique experience compared to our normal feeling of being in front of a sculpture or being in front of a painting.
Right.
So the image that we have in front of us is full of color. The first one was dark and shadowy. This one's full of color. The floor is blue and white checkers. So this might be a floor pattern or a tablecloth pattern from one of his paintings that they now project on the floor. And so you're walking all over what feels like blue and white checkers. On the I'm going to mention some of the zigzag walls around us, and the wall farthest to the left, we just see a corner of it because the walls are too big for me to photograph entirely. But we see a corner of the wall going up beyond the camera, and it's a green background with a red crab on it. So you see the crab from above, basically a big round shell. It's a bit shiny, there's a bit of white shine on it, and he has his left claw that's kind of coming down towards the floor. So a big crab on one wall. And as we move towards the center of the photograph and we kind of look much further away, and people are so tiny, we see close-ups of flowers in a pitcher on a table against a light yellow wall. And so the flowers might be thistles. They're kind of got spines and very thin petals. So they remind me of thistles perhaps. But there's a whole lot of them bursting out of the top of a ceramic pitcher that seems to be maybe a dark blue or a dark gray color. And there's also a bowl of some fruit and a cup that's white with some blue decoration around the rim. And in front of me, there's lots of people, not lots, maybe 10 people. So you're never able to see the wall completely because there's always a little bit of shadows of people in front of you. Moving still to the center of the photo, a bit more to the right, far, far, far away from me, is a lime green wall with white flowers and dark green petals. And the flowers and the petals are coming from the top of the painting down, and then there's just flat green wall. And moving to the right to finish this photograph, we see that the cube in the middle of the room, so the cube was 4 white walls that offered more space for projections. And one of those white walls is a very, very close up of a white painted area of the canvas with Vincent van Gogh's signature on it. And sometimes it's curious, how did the artist sign their paintings? So he just signed it Vincent. And it's just one brush stroke down for part of the V, and then he lifts his brush off the canvas and does another red line up, so the V shape, and then I-N-C-E-N-T, and then he does a swish of his brush from left to right that goes underneath the V-I-N. So he just wrote his first name, and then everything around it is white.
So Jessa, just the way you described the V in Vincent, at the peak, at the bottom of the V, it doesn't actually touch.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's space there. So it looks like 2 lines that are just sort of slanted towards each other to create a V, but there is no connection there, which is, I don't know why I find that so interesting, but I suppose it's that I've never, like when I write my own signature, it's one continuous, fluid, and this is not that, which is super interesting to me.
Yeah, and then with that underline, it feels to me like he's like swish down, swish up, right, swish. Like I get the sense of like the swishing brush in the way that he wrote it there. So different than slow handwriting.
So basically we're in a room that if you had partial sight would probably be quite stimulating in terms of the bursts of colors and the patterns and the seemingly randomness of that. Because I would imagine that kind of the idea is that that too disrupts the flow of how you experience things, right?
Yeah, and so this is what I might call a patchwork effect. Sometimes during the experience, they would have these patchworks of different pieces of different paintings on every single wall. So everything around you felt very different. And then later on, I'll show you an experience where it was one painting all over the space around you. So it feels like it's full of color and you're very small. Everything is so large around you. And it's almost like you could reach out and touch it.
And just for context, do these, like, if I was to stand in this position, looking at these walls the way you've described them, do they remain static or do they change? Like if I stood there for an hour, would they change?
Good question. So the experience of the exhibition, like I walked in expecting different rooms, like many museums have many, many rooms, but this exhibition was one space, but the images change. So the cameras are all timed with the music and the camera projections change and they flow and they fade and they take you on a visual journey. And so it's about a 20-minute music and visual experience, and then it loops forever. So I stayed for about an hour because you might see something once and you want to stay and see it again because you loved it or you missed something the first time. So it could go on as long as you want, but it was about 20 minutes on loop.
Okay, awesome.
All right, so Rick, you can bring up the next image. Thank you. So this is another busy image. It's also a patchwork of multiple different paintings. So each wall has different painting. The floor is a dark black with different misshapen circles on it. So they remind me of flower petals maybe, or dabs of paint, or a pattern perhaps from a tablecloth that's been seen in one of his paintings and then blown up on the floor. So we're walking on quite a dark floor with these light yellow or light white blobs or kind of misshapen circles here and there.
It's funny, they look like popcorn to me.
They do, yeah.
It's like large pieces of popcorn that,
popcorn on a dark floor.
Yeah, and you could stand in a piece of popcorn like you'd stand in the middle of a puddle. That's kind of the size of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so the walls around us I'll start again from the left and we'll move to the right.
Sorry, Jessa, before you describe it, does this room have a name or a collection in this particular space?
There wasn't a name. I can tell you these are all Japanese inspired paintings.
Okay.
So there is sometimes a theme that unites the room, or or a certain painting that unifies the room. The theme of this room very clearly when I saw it was, oh, these are his Japanese inspired paintings.
Great.
So to give you a bit of context, Japanese art was really popular in the late 1800s. A lot of trade was happening with Japan. A lot of modern painters loved Japanese fabrics and kimonos and paintings. It was interesting. It was different than Europeans. And for Van Gogh, he thought it was so inspiring. So it's no surprise that he copied or was inspired by some Japanese artists as he was learning about it. So on the very, very left-hand side, one of the angled walls that we're seeing is his version of a Japanese bridge, a curved, like semicircle Japanese bridge that's curving from the bottom left corner up towards the right. And we see people walking across it. There's 3 people walking across it, but it's just a bit of brush strokes. There's not a lot of detail, but we can tell they have hats on, maybe light yellow hats, maybe straw hats. But the curve of the bridge goes up, kind of halfway up the wall. And in the background, there's lots of light blue and teal and green wiggly brush strokes that symbolize water. And then off in the distance, kind of at the top of the wall, we see more vibrant blues and perhaps the blue of the sky. And that is referencing a well-known Japanese print of people walking over a Japanese bridge. So when I saw that, I was like, aha, he's copying to kind of learn about this way of painting from Japanese art history.
Oh, okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, this was a piece that would have been painted by a Japanese artist, and then Van Gogh saw that piece and thought, I'm going to make my own version of it, kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
In this time in history, a lot of art students would do that. They'd copy the masters as a way to learn.
Interesting.
So he was just loving Japanese prints that he was buying. Him and his brother Theo bought a lot of them. He was fascinated. So he was copying with his own style, but just inspired and doing it a little bit himself. So that one is definitely inspired by a Japanese masterwork. Coming towards the center of the photograph, the walls are much further away now, off in the distance. And on the kind of left-hand side, we're moving from left to right in this photo. So I would say the bridge is far, far left. And now we're moving a little bit more to the right. The tall wall in front of us features 2 herons or 2 cranes, so long-necked white birds. And they're standing in water, and there's lots of white and blue and red brush strokes. And one of them might be eating something in the water. The other one has its head up looking up. And then there's a lot of yellow streaks behind them. And I can't tell if it's grass or bamboo or rushes. There's a lot of yellow streaks behind them going up. So I wonder if it's kind of the grasses around the water. And so that's a sliver of what might have been a Japanese print of birds that are common in that part of the world. And that bumps up against, as we move to the right, another image with a yellow background and a Japanese woman. It could be a man, or it could be a woman. It's hard to tell, simply because of the makeup and the hair. It reminds me of how male and female characters were in Japanese theater. So in any case, we have a long white face with a long nose and small lips, and then just very small lines for the eyebrows. They're kind of pointing down a bit like angry eyebrows in a cartoon perhaps. And then little marks for the eyes, and very elaborate hair with a lot of light blue hair adornments that are decorating the hairstyle. So very elaborate. And the body of this person is enveloped in a robe with a big obi knot at the back. So traditionally kimonos have big wide fabric belts that are about, I don't know, maybe a foot wide, so it covers your whole torso, and then they're bundled into a knot at the very back of the person. So we see that big knot at the back of their robe, and they're kind of looking over their left shoulder towards us. So this very elaborate hair and the white makeup on the face and in the back of the person's robe with that big knot, that kind of takes up the center, and then there's a yellow wall behind them. Moving our attention a bit more to the right, so moving kind of center right, we have a close-up, only a piece now, of a Van Gogh painting. And in the center, there's a portrait of a man. a European man, seems to be Caucasian, he's not Japanese. He's got a white beard and a big nose, and he's got red lips and a lot of white and gray lines for his beard, kind of a bulbous round nose, and he's staring straight ahead at us. And he wears a country hat with a wide brim, and it's just his head and his shoulders. So it's like a zoomed in little bit of a Van Gogh painting. And so this might have been a person that Van Gogh knew, and he paints a portrait of him. But in the background, the wall behind him is covered with different Japanese art prints. So some of them show Japanese mountains, some of them show water and birds, some of them show a village in the wintertime. Another one shows pink cherry blossom trees or sakura blossom trees. So you get a sense that Van Gogh might have pasted a lot of his Japanese prints all over the wall behind this man, and then had the man sat in front of it and then painted his portrait.
I love that. And you know, at the introduction to this, you were talking about a patchwork, and this really reminds me of like having a quilt on your bedspread, you know, where they've taken a collection of Van Gogh pieces and sort of stitched them together. So they almost look like on the wall, like it's one continuous piece that blends into, like one blends into the next, into the next, into the next. Which is super interesting to me. And from what I gather from my little bit of partial in this space, again, lots of color, lots of like overwhelmingly, I don't want to say intricate, because to me his brush strokes aren't necessarily intricate, but it just seems like a bunch of it's like different patterns, right? And so while there's this theme of this Japanese, the patterns seem kind of random in some way to me, right? Like visually random.
Yeah, his brushstrokes, he did a lot of quick brushstrokes, a lot of short brushstrokes. So it makes his paintings look very busy, because there's just so many little brushstrokes that people see, which is quite different than smooth or realistic painting where you can't see the brushstrokes and it looks like perfect sky and perfect skin. So sometimes looking at Van Gogh paintings, they do feel busy or textured, or yeah, there's a lot going on because there's just hundreds of little brushstrokes that he would use. So maybe your intricacy is kind of all those brushstrokes.
Do you know what it reminds me of? And this is like a total leap. It's a total departure. But it reminds me of some of those National Geographic films where they show shoals of fish. And it's like this mass clutter of these little dots. And even the way his brush strokes are is like the way fish move in the ocean. It's like, you know, one predator comes in and the whole group of fish, hundreds of thousands of fish, scatter together in this little group. And so I think my memory of Van Gogh is when you get really close, you know, if you're looking at ocean or whatever, it's almost like you said, it's like a bunch of little dots of paint that have just been like layered and layered and layered. And so when you get close enough, you can actually, you know, if you've got the privilege of sight, you can see how those dots can formulate an image. Yeah, totally interesting. And friends, a reminder to you all that this is an open version of conversation. So if you have questions about Van Gogh or what we're looking at, what we're experiencing, please use the raise your hand function and join the conversation. So in the meantime, Jess and I will just continue to chatter away, but it is an open invite for you to participate.
So Rick, let's move to the next image. Thank you. So I had shown you a couple examples of what were called like patchwork moments in the show, where every wall was a different part of a different painting. But this is an image I want to show you where it's the same painting. And so every wall is showing us a close-up or a faraway shot of the same painting. So in this photograph, we actually had a couple that were standing right in front of me, and they were holding hands. And I thought they were nicely centered, so I made my photo around them. And the woman is on the right-hand side, and she's got a white dress on with a black kind of shorter dress over it. And she's holding her partner's hand, and he has a white shirt and black pants. And I was like, well done, you two match. But they're standing in the middle of the room, kind of taking in what's around them. And the floor is full of dark blues, medium blues, yellows, and whites. And so they've taken part of a painting and projected it onto the floor. So it's like you're walking through or walking on the texture of very thick paint. And this painting that envelops us, this immersive painting that wraps on every wall, was called Wheat Fields, and it was actually painted in the last year of his life. And I've seen this painting in real life because we had it at the Vancouver Art Gallery a couple of years ago, actually. And his brushstrokes are so thick. Like if you think of the texture of toothpaste, and that kind of texture is what oil paint is like. And that is how thick and oozy a lot of his paintings are. There's so much texture, so much thick brushstrokes and hundreds of brushstrokes. And so the floor that this couple is walking on, it kind of looks like all these smeared brushstrokes in different shades of dark blues and medium blues.
Jessa, we've got a couple of hands.
Oh,
so
please.
before you continue with this one, I'm gonna call on Megan and then Myra. And I'm not sure whether these hands are related to the last image. So let's just check in with these folks.
If they are, you can just move
Go
back.
ahead, Megan.
Yes. I love those paintings. Like when you said every painting, like every painting on a different wall. It was kind of cool. Like one Japanese, one a different kind of art. One Canadian, maybe one Australian, and maybe one, that kind of thing. Artists from all around the world, just,
Yeah.
Yeah, they show hang over pictures from all over the world, and we get those, and we put them on the walls, and it looks so cool. So, where did you get those Van Gogh pictures? I mean, these are really good. Yeah.
If you want to buy a Van Gogh picture or a picture of his work.
A picture of his work.
A picture of his work. Most art museums have calendars and prints of famous artworks. So at the Vancouver Art Gallery, you can probably find some prints that have Van Gogh images on them. So I would say you can look online, or if there's an art museum where you live, I would go to their gift shop because people
Okay.
So you'll definitely be able to buy paper prints. You can frame them and put them up in your home. Yeah, gift shop is a good place to start.
Awesome.
You can buy a ton of that stuff online, Megan, if you Google Van Gogh paintings or pictures or posters, things like that. It pops up with opportunities to buy stuff.
And the
That's cool.
posters might be really big, which could be great if size is a helpful thing.
But what if it was in a different frame? Like say we had a big picture frame. Would a big Van Gogh picture be good? Van Gogh art would be good on that one?
Yeah, there would be frames. There could be frames you could get made for any size print that you want.
Oh, good. Okay.
I like to take my posters into Michael's craft stores and have them frame it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so they'll frame for you.
Oh, nice.
Thanks for your question, Megan. Let's
You're
go to
welcome.
Myra. We'll go to Myra and then we'll go to Kathy. We can hear Myra trying to unmute herself, and I think we got her.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, sorry. I'm on the last painting. We just came over the bridge.
Yep.
And I'm curious, the woman with the gown with the bow at the back. Quick question, what color is her gown?
Great. Rick, can you move back one slide? Thank you so much. I apologize, I didn't describe it. I really should have. It's quite dark. At the very, very top, there's sort of a bronzy brown color around the collar. And then really, like, even for me, it's hard to tell what color it is. It could be black, it could be dark gray, it could be dark green. And then there's a lot of brown and white all over what seems to be kind of the folded sculptural shape of the knot. But the way that he's painted it, it's not a really clear pattern. It's just almost like a lump of dark colors and a bit of white that shows me her body. So unfortunately, it's not really clear even for me to be able to describe.
And Jessa, is it meant to be ambiguous in his style of painting?
It could be, yeah. And it could also be just the full, it could have been a dark silk that she was wearing, or he, depending if it was a male or female, with dark red, dark brown, dark black, and then the folds just make it really hard to see a pattern, but you do see dark colors, they're kind of lumped. And so he could have been painting that in a very messy way, which was a modern way to paint at the time, but it's where the face and the hair was very crystal clear. the body was a mix of dark colors in the way that he did.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had her in my mind in white, but I thought I better check.
Well, I think also you can
Thank you very much.
imagine what you want as well. But thank you for asking. And so sorry I didn't describe that fully the first time.
Thanks for the question, Myra. Kathy, question or comment?
Yeah, hello, hi. A few years ago, I just wanted to mention this because it's interesting. A friend took me to, there was an exhibit at the art gallery of Van Gogh's paintings because my friend told me that they were, you could touch them because I guess he used really thick paint. So that's why, I guess. And I was she showed me some of the shapes and I found it really interesting.
Jessa, would those have been reproductions that were brought in, or
Maybe.
were people actually able to touch real Van Gogh paintings?
Quite likely. Amy's actually going to share with us something next to that story, Kathy, in a little bit. But it is very possible to make replicas that are exactly the same as his with oil paint, and then they can be touched. Whereas the originals would be behind glass and not touchable. But I think I've heard about shows like that where Dali or Van Gogh or other famous artists, they have touchable artworks that people can experience with their fingers. So I'm glad that you got to see that, Kathy.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay, let's go back to the
Fantastic. So Rick, can you bring up the next image? Thanks. So we are being enveloped by a painting of wheat fields. So the floor, we're back in this image with the couple in the middle, standing on the floor of dark blue, thick brushstrokes. But the walls around us are full of lemon, vibrant golden yellows and very messy brushstrokes, very thick brushstrokes, but it's this very, very sunny yellow color that's wrapping around most of the walls. And then the very top of the wall is a strip of blues and whites, which is the sky, with some swirling white clouds. And there's these thick shapes that look like an M shapes, like mother, M, and those are crows. And it's a flock of crows, like dozens of them, that he's made these thick M's with black, and they symbolize the crows flying up out of the wheat fields. So bright lemon yellow for the fields, speckled with these black M's that are flying up into the sky, and the sky is deep and medium and dark blues and swirling areas where there's some white clouds.
What I find interesting about this, and I would never have noticed the birds, but when you talk about the birds that fly out of the wheat fields, or I mean, it's the same whether it's cornfields or whatever, but it feels to me like these folks, these literal folks in experiencing this exhibit, like they're walking through these wheat fields, making the birds fly away.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Kind of what it feels like, because you're so surrounded by this like almost tsunami of wheat fields.
Yeah, and it's on every wall around us. Sometimes they're close-up wall, sometimes further away, but it's all elements of the same painting. So it really did feel like this lemon yellow was wrapped around you, and the sky was at the very top of the walls. And yeah, it's almost like the people in the show, we, as you said, startled the birds, and the birds are flying up and away. And if you imagine this wheat field, bright yellows all through most of the painting, sky at the very, very top, there's also a winding dirt path or a dirt road. It's like a wagon road. If you imagine two tire tracks that are going off to the right, kind of up to the right in a slow S shape. And they're kind of brown color with some muddy greeny brown between them. So it reminds me of two ruts, like two wagon ruts in the dirt that's kind of making this pathway that's cutting through the wheat field on the right hand side.
That's probably what's scaring the birds.
Maybe, yeah.
I like my analogy better, but
no, I love yours.
Thank you for sharing. Again, wouldn't have known that there were tracks there, but it's an interesting. It's just so interesting to me because it feels unexpected to be there.
And one of the things that this exhibition is designed to do is when you are watching TV or watching something on a computer screen, it's passive. It's like we look at a screen. But with this showing us color on the floors, on the walls, it's moving, there's music, it's immersive. They wanted it to feel like screens were not just something you look at while you're sitting on your sofa, but rather something you feel like you're startling the birds, or you feel like you go up and touch it. You can't, but you almost could. Or you feel like you're walking on popcorn, or you feel like you're walking on these checkers and then suddenly it changes and now you're surrounded by flowers. And so they wanted to feel like you were exploring the space, not just looking at another screen with what so much of our lives are with screens these days.
I love that.
Nice. Okay, Rick, can you change the image? Thank you. So in a moment, we're going to come into our first painting that we're going to do crowd descriptions. But before we get there, I've got one more image to show you. And it is an image that looks at the many faces of Van Gogh. When people think about him, they often think of, oh, he had a mental illness, he cut his ear, and yes, that did happen, but that was only during 1 year of his life when he was suffering with a lot of depression and getting medical help and support with that. And most of his life, I mean, he was an artist. He started when he was 27, and he was only an artist really for about 10 years. But during that time, he made between 24, I've heard 24, I've heard 35, but he made dozens and dozens of self-portraits. And so the room that we're in now no longer is full of wheat fields. Instead, the floor is very black with lines here and there that look like a strip of a golden or a brown picture frame. So it's like the wooden pieces of picture frame are crisscrossing the floor. So it's a black floor crisscrossed with these straight lines that look like a long strip of a picture frame. The walls around us this time are dark black, and on each of the walls is 1 or 2 framed self-portraits of Van Gogh at different times in his career. Most of his self-portraits were when he was in Paris, so in a 2-year period, but he shows different sides of himself. So I want to let you know one, if you imagine straight ahead, kind of center left of the photo, there's a corner in front of us. And on the left wall is a self-portrait. He is in a dark, well, rich blue coat, and there's a bit of a white shirt showing in the opening of the coat. And there's a matching blue background. So it's his vibrant blue jacket, vibrant blue background. It's a self-portrait of him. He is slightly turning to his right, so kind of turning towards the left side of the picture frame. And close to us at the bottom of the painting, you see that he's holding his painter's palette and some brushes. And so the whole self-portrait is really just kind of his upper arm and shoulders and head. And then you can see his hands there holding his tools. Interestingly, as you kind of go upwards, and you get to his face, his skin is kind of a green color, a green where the shadows are and a bit of a lighter yellow where the light comes. And then his hair was notably ginger or a reddy brown color. So he's got a reddy brown beard, a reddy brown hair, but it's curious that his skin is yellow and green rather than skin tone and shadows of skin tone.
Is there a reason for that, Jessa? Is this just part of experimentation, or is he trying to say something?
So in this time, a lot of modern artists were playing with color. And so sometimes they were using color that was not naturalistic, but it might make up the mood that they want in the painting. And it doesn't mean it symbolizes something directly, but sometimes it was more of an experiment. Like, maybe I can tint the whole painting to look a bit more blue, and therefore my skin looks a bit green rather than natural skin tone. So he might be playing with lots of blues and greens in this painting, rather than painting with purely realistic colors in mind. Mm-hmm. As we move our attention to the right, there's the next one kind of around the center of the photograph, but it's far in the distance on the walls. It's more realistic. So in this case, he is facing the other side of the picture frame. So he's facing towards our right, and you can actually see the back of an easel and a painting canvas on that easel. And that's in the bottom right corner of the canvas. So he's facing towards that picture easel. And in his right hand, we see him holding his flat oval shaped painter's palette with lots of daubs of wet oil paint all over it. So he'd scoop that up with his fistful of paintbrushes. So his right hand is holding his painter's palette and a handful of brushes. And then he's wearing a blue jacket with a bit of a white shirt peeking out. And then his head, his hair is very short, clipped, and his beard is clipped, but very short to his face, short to his head, but again, that reddy brown color. And the background is white. And his skin tone in this case is more peaches, where the light shows, and more browny peaches where the shadows are. So this one has a bit more naturalistic colors compared to that blue and green one.
We've got a hand from Julia.
Hi, Julia.
Hi there. I was just wondering, the self-portrait, whether or not Van Gogh sort of did more or less than, say, other painters, and also if there's, you know, do you know if there's some reason why a painter might choose to do a self-portrait, let's say, rather than paint the world around them?
Good question. So he was the first in several. The question.
No, that's it. That's it.
I wasn't sure if I interrupted you, sorry.
No.
So he was the first European artist in several centuries to do this many self-portraits. Typically people would paint or draw a model in a studio, but he had no money. He only sold one painting in his life, and it was in the last year of his life. Most of his paintings he was giving to his brother or trying to trade or trying to sell. He couldn't afford an artist model. So you are the person you always have with you. So he used himself as a painter's model. And he intentionally showed himself as quite serious in a lot of his portraits, not smiling or anything like that. So he was using himself as a way to show that he could paint the human face in different moods, different styles. Some of them are actually very realistic. Some of them are really quite experimental. But when in my research, one source said 24, but the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam says there's 35 self-portraits of his that are known. And so that was really a standout for European art. There's a couple artists much earlier in history that did a lot of self-portraits, but Van Gogh has really inspired people since then to look at their own faces as a human face. And he did it in so many different styles.
So I have a couple of questions about the self-portrait, I guess, genre. These three that and I know you haven't described the last one yet, but the three of these images are all, like you had said, from sort of chest up. So one, did he ever paint anything in full profile or like the full body? And two, what's the process of doing a self-portrait? Like, how do you paint yourself when you're moving? Or, you know, like, again, my knowledge of like when the history of photographs came in is not so crisp and clear, but I can't imagine that was such an accessible option to have a photograph of yourself to be able to paint it, right? If photographs even existed at this time. So what are your thoughts around the process of creating a self-portrait?
Great question. So photos were invented in 1840, and he was born in 1853. So photos were around during his lifetime, but they would have been expensive, and he did not have much money. And so he made a lot of his self-portraits in Paris when he was in his early years as an artist, taking art classes, art schools, and he would have used a mirror quite likely. And so it involves sitting still and not moving very much, but still, you know, looking back and forth from your canvas to your mirror. And he wrote so many letters to his brother Theo, which is wonderful because it means we have a lot of his ideas. And he was saying to his brother, people say, and I'm quite willing to believe it, that it's difficult to know oneself, but it's not easy to paint oneself either. So he found it quite challenging, and his face and his hair changes over time and his painting style changes, but it was never easy for him to paint the man in the mirror. But most of his work, I mean, he made about 2,000 artworks in his 10-year career, 2,000. And yes, 35 of them were self-portraits, but most of his work was about looking outdoors and looking at the world around him. And
he did nothing but paint for a decade. Basically,
it was a huge part of his existence, yeah, for the last 10 years.
And to only have sold one painting,
heart-wrenching,
right? Interesting. Okay, all right, I'll let you describe that third photo for us. And
so there's one more in this dark room of self-portraits I want to show you, but it connects nicely with the next slide. And so it's a more realistic self-portrait. Out of the three that I've described for you, this one's the face, to me, is the most realistic. You can really get a sense that he had quite I say this, I don't mean to be funny, but kind of a triangle shaped head. Like his forehead was quite wide with the red hair on top. And then I feel like his cheekbones lead to a pointy chin. So you can imagine his face being kind of a triangle shape. And so you get a sense of the white light on his forehead, on the right-hand side, coming from the right. He's, again, head and shoulders, and he's tilting his head a little bit to the left-hand side of the picture frame. But he's looking at us, kind of giving us a side eye. And it's quite natural, like heavy eye sockets and eyebrows, a bit of shadow under his eyebrows, and his eyes are looking towards us. Very long, straight nose with a bit of a shine of light on it. And then you get a sense of his cheekbones kind of sinking in a little bit, and then his red-brown mustache and beard. And then further below, you get a sense of a dark coat with a white shirt that's showing at the top of the coat. And the entire background, the entire coat are full of a lot of color. But from where we are standing here, it's all very dark, so it's hard to tell. But that brings us to the next image that I want Rick to bring up, because we're going to
just before you do that, Jessa, we've got a hand from Sharon, so I want to make sure we capture that before we move on.
Sounds good.
Sharon, when you're ready, you can unmute yourself.
Great. Hi. So I was just curious, are these the only 3 self-portraits in the show, or do they end up showing all of them?
So at this moment, there were dozens of self-portraits around me. Sometimes they were close-up versions, sometimes they were far away. I don't think they had all 35, but they had many. And so I could only, in a photograph, capture one angle, like one corner of the room. But in this moment, it felt like there was many Vincent van Goghs.
You were surrounded by Vincents?
Yeah.
Kind of a nice way to be. Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
Great question. Thanks, Sharon.
All right.
So this is,
Go ahead.
I was like, this is when we get into our crowdsource description bit. So I don't want to cut you off, Jessa, but what I want to do is to invite Jiten and Eileen into the space, introduce them to our listeners, and then I'll let you
Absolutely
sort of, share a little bit about what we're going to experience. So Jiten and Eileen.
Hello.
Hello, I hear Jiten. Do I hear Eileen?
Hello.
Hello to you both. So you know, as this is sort of a little breather break, as I'm gonna chat with you both a little bit about the crowdsource description process, and I suppose, Jiten, this is a question for you. Just quickly tell us what it is we're going to experience and how that came together.
Sure. So I think about a month ago, we put out a call to various people, people that I know, people that are volunteers at VocalEye, trained describers, and we asked them to try their best to describe a couple of Van Gogh works. And we asked for descriptions that were under 300 words. Some people gave us very short descriptions. Some people pushed that boundary a little bit. And we asked for 2 levels of description. So the first being, what did they see? Like what's actually on the canvas? And secondly, how did they respond to it? What was their subjective experience? What sort of emotions came up for them?
Awesome.
And yeah, so we got about 20 people responded. Some people did both, some people just did one. But tonight we're going to hear a selection of 10 different descriptions of each of these works.
Okay, so we're going to start with the self-portrait, and I know that you're going to be the voice and Eileen's going to be the voice reading out these folks' prepared descriptions. So I'm really excited about that. And just before we invite you to share those, I'm going to just put this back in Jessa's hands to set up what it is, not to describe what we're looking at, but just to set up, what we need to know about this image from maybe a technical perspective, dates, size, those kinds of things before we hear some crowdsource stuff.
Yeah. So this is a self-portrait from 1887. And it's not very big. So it's maybe from your elbow until halfway up your hand. That's how tall it is. And then how wide it is like your elbow to your wrist. So it's a portrait, so it's taller than it is wide, but it's quite small. You could easily hold it between your two hands. And it's an oil painting on a board rather than on canvas.
That's interesting. I'm sure we're going to unpack that after we hear the crowdsource stuff. So,
all right, Jiten, I think you are up first.
Yeah, okay, so this first description comes from Emily, who says that she is a violinist and grad student who also likes cycling, baking, and helping out in her community. Van Gogh is sitting at a slight angle away from the viewer with the painting cutting off at his chest. The focus is on his face, which is turned slightly to be facing the viewer and looks pensive. He's wearing a dark blazer and has a beard and mustache. The background is dark and doesn't change. Most of the colors are somewhat muted, making his pale face and ginger hair stand out. This painting makes me feel as if I knew Van Gogh. It has a very personal feel.
Thanks, Jiten. This next offering is from Manpreet, who says, I am in training to be a counselor and am from India. I see a man looking at me. He has a red beard and reddish brown hair. He has a jacket on a white shirt. The jacket is brown in color with blue lines on the collar. The background is in the color of blue, orange, and green. They are all tiny dots and they look static. The man seems to be relaxing his face and looks either suspicious or tired. We can only see him to his chest. After seeing the painting, I feel stared at and I think about events in my life. It feels like a prompt.
Leslie, who says, I'm busy embellishing my patio as it is now used more than my living room, wrote, in this self-portrait, the artist displays a slim face with angular features, such as a thin nose and prominent cheekbones. His light skin is contrasted with his reddish brown hair and his ginger-colored beard and mustache. His pale blue eyes are set in a cold stare. He's outfitted in a heavily textured tweed jacket in colors of burgundy and teal. The jacket is highlighted with a teal blue trim around the lapel and is worn over a white shirt with a blue tie. The artist has used dark colors of blue and green punctuated with small flecks of orange for the background. His stony gaze is not one of contentment and is lacking in warmth.
And Emily, who says, I live in Vancouver and I am a pharmacist, her take is, this is a portrait of Van Gogh. He has a very serious expression and he looks tired and sad. He has piercing blue eyes and an orange beard. His hair is lighter orange than his beard is and is combed back. You can see one of his ears and it looks more pink than the rest of his face. He doesn't look very healthy, judging by his greenish skin tone and the circles under his eyes. He is wearing a suit jacket with a white shirt underneath. The texture of the painting is grainy, and the background is strokes of green and orange and dark blue. This is a very gloomy and dark image, and it makes me feel sad for the man in the portrait.
So next one is mine, Jiten, and I introduce myself as a 31-year-old counseling psychology grad student, classical musician, and avid rock climber. In this self-portrait, we see Van Gogh looking straight out at the viewer over his left shoulder. His face takes up most of the upper 2/3 of the canvas and is the most realistic looking part of the painting. The entire painting is rendered with obvious brushstrokes, creating a kind of pixelated effect. But his facial features, to torture the metaphor, have a higher resolution. He has a full orange beard that is neatly trimmed, and the blonde hair on top of his head is combed back. The skin on his nose and cheeks is pinkish, while his large forehead is pale and reflects the light. His eyes are a piercing green that echoes the backdrop. His brow is furrowed, making him seem worried, but on the whole, I would describe his emotional state as inscrutable. His shoulders, covered in a suit jacket, occupy the lower third of the canvas. A white shirt and sky blue tie peek out at his collar. At a far distance, the suit jacket would appear burgundy, but up close I can see separate splotches of reds, greens, blues, and purples. Similarly, the background is a swirl of different color patches, mostly turquoise and dark blue. but also plenty of bright orange accents. The overall effect is psychedelic, like Van Gogh is surrounded by an unreal, chaotic world.
Ooh. Walt, who says, I'm a retired orchestral musician, his take is, I see a middle-aged man with sandy colored hair and a neatly trimmed beard. This is not a happy person, especially his eyes indicate extreme depression and exhaustion. The painting is done in a pointillistic, I think I'm no expert, style. The background is in blues and greens, and the man's jacket is in browns with spots of other colors. The colors used in his beard are interesting, some almost blood-like red spots added to my feeling of desperation that he is feeling. I feel very sad for him.
Sharon, who says, I am a volunteer at CNIB and I have been a vision mate since 2003. I also volunteer as a theater buddy for the VocalEye organization. She wrote, the background of this canvas resembles the background of the Starry Night. We're foreshadowing a bit. It uses the same dominating bluish tones and hues with the added splotches of orange. The flowing and pulsing of the strokes of color forms the background and gives, if not a movement, a rhythm or intensity to the painting. In the foreground, of course, is the self-portrait. Van Gogh painted himself with reddish hair and beard, gaunt features and intense gaze. His expression is painted as surly, almost angry. There are deep creases by the nose and cheekbones. The eyebrows are thick and prominent. The corners of the mouth are turned down. It is the face of a man who seems impatient. The painting shows he is wearing a white shirt underneath a jacket with the same flowing and pulsing strokes of reds and browns and blues. At first glance, I always think the man in the painting is angry or impatient or annoyed or aggressive. But after a little time of looking at the painting, the man almost seems resigned, yet confident. It does not seem, in fact, to be an unfriendly face.
Margaret, who is a retired orchestral musician and private music teacher, says, this portrait suggests a worn down and sad individual. His eyes have a piercing and harrowing gaze, and the dark pouches under his eyes foretell a gloomy outlook on life. The redness of his beard maybe presents a brighter and more optimistic approach to his life. However, his graying hair is taking over and gloom persists. His clothes have a contrasting appearance, being quite colorful and trendy. This picture depicts very contrasting images, a fight against the weight of depression. This picture has conflicting messages. The clothes, the contrasting colors of hair, and the haunting, almost drugged look of the eyes make me feel that the character is in a fight against depression.
Lynn, who says, I am a lover of paint and pictures, says, I see a man sitting 3/4 facing me. His head and shoulders down to the top of his chest are visible. He has a high forehead and receding sandy red hair. His green eyes are deep set, and he's looking out from the corner of his eyes at me. His view is penetrating, quizzical, as if he's wondering whether to trust me. His ear, his left one, is ruddy, infused with blood, as if he's just come in from the cold. His carefully barbered red beard and mustache elongates his long and pointed face, high cheekbones and hollowed cheeks. His lips are pursed, as if he's about to say something. His dark burgundy jacket is edged in a teal green, and the color on the white collar draws my eye to under his beard. It's brighter and the brightest thing in the painting, connecting me to the whites of his eyes that are diminished in their saturation. The painting is painted in small strokes of color, their direction and activation creating form and moving my eye around the painting. The use of complementary color, an orange red with a teal blue green, mix in different proportions to create the shapes that form the painting, the jacket, the background, the head of the sitter / the artist. They have a restless energy, moving out of the picture frame and back in again. The eyes, the ear, under the chin, and the lips holding my gaze. I feel unsettled by the stare and wonder how to connect to this person who feels like he's jumping off the canvas. His ear is cocked as if to listen, but his pursed mouth and sad eyes hold me at bay. His ruddy complexion makes me curious about his health and emotional state. His neatly combed hair, beard, and jacket tell me he's cared for. But the colors speak of rawness and disquiet.
Oh boy. Jennifer, who says, I'm semi-retired and I live on Galliano Island. Her view is, Van Gogh's self-portrait depicts the Dutch artist in three-quarter view down to his chest height. He appears well-groomed. The left side of his face and head are in full view, revealing an expression of reserve, but concentrated focus on his subject. He has high cheekbones, a long, sharp nose, and despite a full mustache and cropped beard, his cheeks appear sunken and his jawline narrow. A pronounced forehead and receding hairline border neatly combed hair, defined in a series of green and sand-colored brushstrokes, topped with eye-catching maroon highlights. A tidy arrangement of horizontal lines sweep back, forming the curvature of his head, where shorter hairs rise from the top of his forehead. A juxtaposition of maroon brushstrokes against dark muted greens and blues mixes to produce Van Gogh's brown jacket. The material on the viewer's left is rendered in stacked horizontal lines, while the opposite side features a random pattern of shorter strokes. A ladder of dark blue-green lines snake along the outer lapel edge. In contrast, adjacent to the inner lapel lies a white shirt collar with a light sky blue tie, the knot at its center. Van Gogh appears still in concentration, yet fully alive, set against a background of contrasting, vibrating color. Dabs of red and orange pop from the canvas. Some swim like tiny goldfish in a sea of blue-green brushstrokes. Initially, I was struck by Van Gogh's overall use of pattern and color. Curiosity led to a closer look and a technique easily read. A range of controlled brushstrokes characterize different areas of the canvas. Brush marks are layered and abutted. Combinations of colored dabs, dashes, and lines align horizontally, vertically, or in a random arrangement. Purposefully in unison, the strokes present an interplay of color, creating pattern, movement, and form. It's pure magic. Van Gogh's beard, mustache, and lower lip are captured in an array of hues: maroon, reds, corals, burnt orange, even a few grass green highlights. And green eyes set below furrowed eyebrows that intensify his gaze, elicit an uncanny feeling of who is holding whose gaze? Who is observing whom? I'm uncertain why, but the painting leaves me feeling very sad. And that will take us back to Jessa.
Thank you so much. So listening to everyone's descriptions, I loved how different and sometimes similar a lot of our responses were. A lot of people look at this and think of sadness, but it's interesting because in this time, so 1887 was when he was painting this. He was in Paris for a couple of years. He was taking art classes. His brother Theo was working at an art dealership. Like Van Gogh was absorbing ideas, and he wasn't in the depths of depression. It wouldn't actually be until next year, 1888, that he gets into a dark time and cuts off his ear and is in southern France in a mental hospital. But in this time in Paris, it wasn't like that. And so it's interesting how sometimes we see images of Van Gogh and we think of sadness, and part of me is like, is it our projection, or is he actually sad? Or is he just kind of tired? Or is he just giving us a serious face because he wants to show people that he can paint a serious human face? So I think it's always interesting how much the artist is meaning for us to see and how much we are seeing. And so there's no firm line on that, but it's something always to think about whenever we look at art. But he did say that,
we have a hand from Tilo, Jessa, so I'm going to just
come on
let Tilo unmute. And oh, I'm lying. It's not Tilo. I'm reading wrong. It's Tim. Pardon me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hello there.
What's your question, Tim, or comment?
Yes. Just overall, how is it that an artist who had a career of 10 years, no commercial success, rises to become such an iconic artist of that time. Like, what happened that he is where he is on the scale of artists to be looked at and studied?
Yeah.
Great question.
So he sold a painting at the end of and last year of his life. His brother, throughout the years, he'd been sending art to his brother and writing letters about his art projects and his plans and what he was making. And his brother was submitting his art to shows. And so he was getting into exhibitions in the last couple of years of his life in Paris. And there were some positive reviews in the newspapers, and some people thought it was too colorful for some bourgeois tastes. And after he died, modern art was still growing. And so people were doing all kinds of things in the early 1900s. And they would look at Van Gogh's work and go, oh, wow, it's colorful, it's vibrating, it's humming, it's swirling, it's bold. And so a few years later, that was more accepted. And Theo and his wife actually worked really hard after Van Gogh died to exhibit his work, to sell his work. And so his brother was a huge cheerleader for him throughout his whole life. Even if Vincent was a bit eccentric and didn't make a lot of sales, he was a big supporter of his brother, focusing on art as much as he could. So sometimes someone's work during their time is not really popular, but as times change, people look back at these 2000 drawings and paintings and see something really interesting in them. And so since then, many people have come to appreciate the bright, vibrant, humming, swirling paintings of his, even though in the 1880s, not everybody liked them.
Okay, so it was like having a promoter.
Oh goodness, yes. Yes, if his brother had not believed in him, I don't know what would have happened to his paintings. And after he died, his brother received all of his work from his home. So thank goodness for Theo.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Tim. And I know when we come back, sort of after we've gone through this experience, we can talk a bit more about their relationship and the story of the ear and all that kind of stuff. So it's coming, folks. It's coming.
So just one more point I want to make on this painting.
Yeah.
Though. He was deeply inspired by pointillism. So Eileen mentioned that in one of her readings, little dots of paint. He saw other artists doing that from the Impressionists. He loved that. And so he wanted to do that. So this painting and a lot of his paintings after Paris have tiny little marks of paint, little dots, little dabs of paint. So he uses a lot of blue in the background here with dabs of orange or reds and blues. So he really was very colorful after Paris. And it's starting here with the fiery oranges in his beard, but a lot of it is quite dark, but all these little dabs of paint were coming from how inspired he was by a lot of modern art that was happening in Paris while he was living there during this time when he painted this work.
And I just, for clarification for me, like these little dabs of paint that are a part of the background and a part of his jacket are not the same as his face. His face doesn't seem to me to be little dabs of paint, or am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. I find his face to be the most realistic part of the painting. And there are little marks on his beard for all the reds and oranges, but the face to me feels like the most realistic, and all the little marks of paint in his hair. There's some greens and browns, but it's very straight, smooth lines going up into his hair or down into his beard. So his face is more realistic with a little bit of mark making on top of it, but his jacket and his background is full of little tiny flecks of paint. So I thought it was interesting to choose this one when I was choosing it, because part very modern and part realistic in the same way.
Totally interesting stuff. I love this.
All right, let's move to the next. We've got one next slide to show that connects to an experience that Amy's going to share with us. So just to let you know what this image is first, we are back in that exhibition space. The floor is full of zigzag shapes of light blue and close-up images of sunflowers. But it's really close up, so it feels like you're walking on jagged shapes of orange and light blue. If we tilt our attention upwards and straight ahead, across the room is a corner, and on the left-hand wall is a light blue background and close-up of sunflowers with kind of muted oranges and then almost fiery oranges in the center around where the seeds are. And these sunflowers are big, bursts of orange. There's so many of them, they almost cover up the entire background. On the right-hand side, still sunflowers, yellow wall this time, And again, it's a close-up of one of his many paintings of sunflowers. He loved sunflowers. It was like one of his symbols. And we have some of the flowers seem to almost have no petals. It's just the center area where the seeds grow. And so at the top of the wall, there's 3 clusters of orange, and they seem like they have no petals. And then lower down on the wall, there's 3 more flowers that have kind of wrinkled and creased and folded and almost damaged looking petals, almost like maybe they're past their prime and some of the petals have fallen off. And the stems are kind of snaking down into the floor where this image ends. So it's like the curators have taken these close-up images of so many of his famous sunflower paintings and surrounded us with a patchwork of different sunflowers.
And just for some context, for some scale, would you say that one of these sunflowers is like the size of a car? Like
Well,
that?
yeah, it's a great question. So I'm looking at this photograph. I can see there's maybe 20 people scattered throughout the space. They're like little silhouettes against the screen. One sunflower is probably as tall as 2 people. And so the sunflower's width is probably also 2 people if they were lying on the ground, maybe even 3 people, like 3 full-size adults. So yeah, maybe the size of a car is a good width for some of these sunflowers. That's a good analogy. So it feels like we are as small as a little insect.
Yeah, we are the insect on the petals of these sunflowers.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I chose this photo because it connects nicely with a story that you have, Amy, about one of your travels to Amsterdam. And there's a couple images that you have to show us.
Yeah, so if Rick wants to bring up the next photo, when we talked about doing this Van Gogh, Imagine Van Gogh, and I was really interested in it because in May of 2019, which feels like just before the pandemic, I guess it kind of was, my mother and I did sort of a little European vacation, and we spent some time in Amsterdam, which is where the Van Gogh Museum is located. And in this Van Gogh Museum, they have an accessibility wall specifically for folks who are blind or partially sighted, which was one of the reasons why I really wanted to go to this museum. Now, it is only of the one painting, and I too am a lover of sunflowers, so I was really happy for it to be the sunflower painting. And so in this image here, this is a little bit to what Kathy was speaking about earlier, is an image of the sunflowers. It's a replica with the thickened brush strokes. And so it's a picture of me. I'm proudly holding my white cane, folks, and with a really beautiful, ornate, dark frame. It's probably about, half a body high. So from your hip to your head for the average person. And I'm exploring this painting with my finger, and the painting is of what I would say is like a terracotta or a clay type vase, a large vase pot filled with sunflowers. And just like you said, some of the sunflowers are open and some of them were not open, and some of them were in sort of like states of dying. It was like the iteration of the sunflower and its life cycle almost in this one pot. And it's all, for me, it felt like all layers of yellows. So the background's yellow, and the tabletop, that you just sort of get an understanding that this vase is on a tabletop. It's a different color yellow, and then the vase is yet another shade of yellowy browns, and then of course the sunflowers have these shades of yellow. So it was really interesting to explore the shapes of these sunflowers through the raised paint, and I was totally like blown away by the experience. And some of the other things that they have here, just so folks are aware, is they had a little smell gallery. So you could open this little box and it smelled like sunflowers. They had the information panel, so the write-up of the piece in Braille and in large print. Also had an audio guide, so you could access it by audio. And they actually had a replica of the pot itself. So on a desk to the side was the pot. And you could explore that with your hands and feel sort of the smoothness of the glaze, and then how it transitions to the sort of the roughness of the terracotta and little handle on the side. And so it really took me inside of the painting to be able to sort of explore that in a 3D way. There's one other photo here that I wanted to share just in terms of access. So Rick, I'll get you to bring up the other photo. And this is a photo, it's a black and white version of pretty much the same thing that's in the painting. So you've got really high contrast for folks who want to sort of use their partial sight to sort of see the okay, I can't use that word today. But to see the contrast of what we're looking at here. And the other thing about this is it's printed on a plastic, it's like a plastic page. It's a thick plastic page, and all of the lines are raised, right? So I can really trace my fingers around this black and white image. The lines are raised, so it's very tactile. So it's a bit like it's, you know, without comparing it too much to Braille, but it's like tactile maps that we've seen, you know, maps of the world where they raise the paint, but this is plastic, so it's made from a 3D printer. And so it's not going to get damaged. It's not going to get worn down over time. And you can really take your time and explore these areas in the Van Gogh Museum. And to Megan's question earlier, when I left there, I purchased a photo of, it was a little bit like a postcard, but it was an oversized postcard, like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, postcard material of the sunflowers painting. And then I brought it home and I framed it, and it's proudly in a space in my house because I just love the idea of it so much. So I wanted to, since we were talking about Van Gogh, and I'm not an art historian, I just know what I've experienced and what I enjoyed about it. And there are a ton of paintings in the Van Gogh gallery, as Jessa pointed out, but there is also an audio tour. And so for me, you know, I didn't necessarily stand in front of each one and listen to it, but sometimes I just found myself a quiet space in the corner and just listened to them like an audiobook. And that was a really lovely gift, to have the opportunity to sort of not battle with the crowd. The other thing that they have at some of these museums that, from an accessibility perspective, kind of bugs me a little bit, but I get it, is this little border against the wall, and it only comes to like the top of your ankles, but it's like the ropes of a boxing ring, right? It's like this thick elastic band, so you can't get too close to the painting. It's a part of a stanchion, but it's really easy to trip on if you don't know that it's there. And so I was often getting my cane caught in it, and so at some point I had to defer to sighted guide technique and be guided through the space, just to be able to navigate crowds and some of those other things. And they do, in this particular gallery at Van Gogh, this Van Gogh gallery as well, also have a painting, the sunflower painting, that is about 3 stories high. So, you know, several people on top of each other, 5-6 people on top of each other. And it's just a huge wall, and you can stand in front of this wall and have your photo taken of this exact, which I did, my mother and I did. And so it's a lovely memory that we have. So if you're ever thinking of doing some world travel, or know that you're going to be in the Amsterdam area, it's one of the highlights of visiting Amsterdam for sure.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, it's very encouraging and interesting, I think, to hear about museums making that shift and finding ways to make things multisensory. And so having been through that, were you satisfied coming out of that? Like, that was an interesting, fulfilling experience, or was there anything that you would have wished they'd done more of?
I spent more time here than I did in the rest of the gallery, which says something, just because the rest of the gallery has got a lot more paintings. But I was really able to take my time and explore. And I guess my only criticism is that there wasn't more of it, because I would have loved to experience Starry Nights in this way. And again, knowing that these gallery spaces, while there's a lot of stuff in them, they're relatively small. You know, the paintings are really close to each other, which is why it is so crowded. And you can't necessarily get in front of a small painting if you've got partial sight to be able to make anything out, because everybody else crowded in front of it, or crowded in front of the painting beside it, getting in your way of getting in front of the, so I would have loved to have just had more opportunities, even if it was just this black and white 3D printed image. If they had a collection of those, because they don't take up much space, right? You just stack them on top of each other or whatever. They're no bigger than a menu in a restaurant. This would have been a really great thing to just pick up and sit down in a corner and just explore. And with the interesting way that Van Gogh painted, would have been a really interesting experience to compare one painting to the other in that way.
I feel like we should email the Van Gogh Museum. Well, thank you.
So thanks for the opportunity to share, because it fits in so nicely with this program offering. And I guess, my question is about this museum, and is, Van Gogh was Dutch, which I guess makes sense. Was Van Gogh from Amsterdam or another part of the country? And if he spent so much time in France, are some of his works in France, or are all of his works in this museum? I don't know. What do you know?
He's Dutch. He lived in Amsterdam. He lived in Belgium. He went to London for a bit. He lived in southern France, in Paris and outside of Paris. And his art is all over the world. There's multiple museums around the world that have a few Van Goghs. Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam is one of the biggest collections, but you'll find him on many travels, because he's a popular fellow.
And are there folks that have own his paintings privately, or are they all available for public, or have been donated back to the public?
There's probably a few private collectors that are lucky. Maybe they bought them in the 50s and that kind of thing, or have had in their family for a long time. So there's probably some private collectors, yes.
Awesome.
All right, so we've got two last images to show you. The first one Rick can bring up, and that will lead us to the last crowdsource piece. So the first image I want to show you is us back in that exhibition space, and we are immersed in Starry Night. And so Starry Night is one of his most, if not his most, iconic works. It's a painting that's primarily blues and whites and yellows. And it's a painting that he created from the view of his window of the hospital that he was living in during the year that he had a lot of mental health issues. In 1888, 89. But what we have experiencing here is a few people around the room who are like little dark silhouettes in the space, but the floor is dark blues and blacks and some dark yellows, just because there's not a lot of light down there, but it's a section of the painting that's been blown up. If you imagine the left-hand side of the painting, and then we're going to move to the right, the left-hand wall that we're near, it's very close up. So what I'm seeing are some vertical lines in light lavenders or grays or whites that might be rooftops or buildings from the village that's in the Starry Night painting. And then moving my eyes up, I see blues and whites that are all kind of swirling in flicks of color. It's even hard for me to figure out what I'm looking at, but I know it's a close-up moment from the painting. Moving our attention towards the center of the photograph, there's a corner off in the distance. So there's two walls that are angled towards that corner. But across the two walls, they've projected a big part of the sky from the Starry Night painting. So on the far, far left of this wall corner that we're looking at, I see a slice of the moon that is orange with a yellow glow around it and a white glow around that. And then moving a bit more to the right, I see a dot of yellow that is a star, but has this radiating circular white brush strokes all around it, almost like a dandelion puff around that tiny star. And he does this across the sky. Wherever the yellow stars are, he then creates this glow of white curved brush marks that are radiating around. Explosions across the sky of yellow encircled by white. And so there's that moon on the left, there's a very large cluster of white around a star. There's a smaller one above it, a small yellow star with a cluster of white brush strokes swirling around it. And then as I move the attention to the center, there's this wave, this swirling wave of white and blue that feels like it's going up and down and swirling across the sky. And it reminds me of the swirling clouds or the swirling Milky Way. And in the center of this swirling sky is a wiggly cypress tree that's almost like a flame that's flickering upwards, kind of wiggling upwards, very tall and skinny and wiggly. And then the white and blue swirls continue through the sky behind it. And then there's more of these yellow stars encircled by little white brush marks. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 or 7 of them that are sort of dancing around the swirls.
There's something about this that feels to me like you would see it in a child's storybook. There's something really like innocent about this. Like a child's painting almost.
For him, his paintings were a mix of what he saw, what he remembered. And we'll describe it in detail in a moment here. But it's curious, we could even think that children's books are sometimes very like modern way of drawing that you would never see 150 years ago. So maybe illustrators today are inspired by artists like Van Gogh or others that made a simpler, vibrant, colorful way of seeing the world. And now it's very common to us. We see it in books everywhere. But so it's curious, you know, who inspired who? Maybe he was inspired by kids, I'm not sure, but I agree. We see a lot of cartoons, animation. It feels to me like you'd see an animated movie that looks like this.
And there's something that's really nice about that, because it gives the viewer the opportunity to almost make an impression, you know, to gather in the information and sort of interpret it in the way that works for them.
Yes. With any art experience, there's like several things that can happen. There's your own experience, your own memories, and then there's the artist's life or the curator's meaning or what was happening in that year in their life or in art history. There's all these simultaneous meanings that can happen, and your connection to child's books, I think, is an interesting one. So thanks for pointing that out.
Thanks.
But let's change the slide to the last image that we want to do with a little bit of crowdsourcing. So you can lead the way, Amy.
Yeah, no, this is the image in its entirety, right? So we're, you know, now we're not looking at the walls, we're looking at the image itself. So Jessa, for context and scale, before we have Jiten and Eileen share the crowdsource description, how big would this painting have been in real life?
Yeah, so it is, let's see, it's about 3 feet wide. So I'm going like from elbow to wrist. So 3 of those wide. And then about 2 from your elbow to your wrist, 2 of those high.
It sounds like it's bigger than some of his other paintings.
This one is a bit bigger, definitely, but it was also easel size. So all of his paintings, he'd make them that he could paint outdoors, paint in his room, paint on an easel. So they have to be sized that you can carry them. So yeah, think of like 3 of your elbows to your wrists wide and then 2 of those high. So it's a landscape, so it's wider than it is tall. And it was painted in 1889. So this is the year that he was in the mental hospital in southern France. It's an oil painting on canvas. So I think we have first up is Eileen.
Thank you. And this is Maria's take on this. She says, I live in Burnaby. I work in the nonprofit management sector and spend my spare time rock climbing. The setting is nighttime with the wind and stars shining over an ancient village. It also happens to be windy by the swirls shown in the sky. In the bottom half of the painting is a village with older and crooked-looking huts or cabins with mountains in the background. On the bottom left of the painting is a dark tower growing upwards like a vine. The overall mood is mystical, mysterious, but also calm.
Cynthia, who says, I'm a voice actor and recovering teacher, excited to be continuously learning and sharing, says, a deep blue background covers the top 2/3 of this rectangular painting with yellow and white circles and swirls indicating the night sky. The brushstrokes are visible as small disconnected dashes, which makes me feel like there is movement, like a wind blowing from left to right and around and around. The demarcation between sky and land is a series of small mountains in shades of blue, gently rising from left to right. In the left forefront is a tall, dark shape, like a crackling flame. Wide at the bottom, it tapers almost to the top of the painting. To the right of the shape, and much smaller, to show that they're further back, are many small rooftops, houses with a small patch of yellow like an evening light was left on, a church steeple, and round mounds of trees. Although the village appears calm to me, the sky seems to be rolling and restless.
And Taylor, who is a local Vancouver artist who has art shows regularly at local Vancouver restaurants and cafes, says, I see magnificent swirls of deep blues and pale blues in the sky with spiral bursts of yellow and cream that I take to be stars, but which look like balls of bright sun against the purpley blue sky. Below the sky are dark undulating hills, and below the hills is an impressionistic cityscape, like a village at night where you see just the rooftops and the light shining from within some of the homes. In the foreground is a tall wavy tree that reaches up into the starry sky. His painting makes me feel like the universe is alive, like there is a pulsing vitality to everything from the sky and foothills to the rooftops and trees. The way Van Gogh uses paint with swirling impasto strokes makes his paintings feel like they're literally vibrating with energy and life.
Next, we have Mo, who says, I'm an audio describer in the UK, and I imagine Mo has gone to sleep by now. The painting is a little wider than it is tall and depicts a night sky with a bright crescent moon and many stars. It is predominantly blue, composed of swirling brushstrokes in a range of rich blues with highlights of white and yellow. Below this huge sky, a little town and some woodland lie low before distant hills. Church houses and hills are outlined with simple dark edges. In the foreground on the left, dark trees cluster and strive fluidly upward, rippling like elongated flames. The skyward tapering of the trees echoes the pale church spire beyond. The trees cut across the curves of the sky as the spire cuts across the curves of the hills. The sky is striking for its sense of movement. The air seems to tumble in big curling waves between the stars. Each heavenly body is an intense point of yellow surrounded by concentric circles of paler yellow and white, rippling out so that the stars and moon appear radiant. The circles and spirals of the churning sky are formed of long brush strokes of differing shades, laid alongside each other to flow in the same sinuous directions. They give a sense of life and urgency. I love the way the undulating strips of pigments are left evident as separate strokes, clean and unblended on the canvas, but mixing in the mind. I feel the artist's confidence and joy in the purity of these colors. The flow of the brushwork pulls my gaze to follow it like a river. I was delighted to find an affectionate homage to this picture in my hometown of Derby in the UK yesterday. As part of a festival, it has been reproduced on a statue, but with distinctive local dry stone walls and fields to replace the original town.
Oh, how interesting. And Melissa, who says she's an admin person for Descriptive Video Works, says, a yellow moon and a scattering of yellow stars hang in a swirling blue sky. Under the sky, a village dominated by a church steeple is clustered at the base of rolling blue hills. A few windows in the village glow yellow, but we're too far away to see any people. In the foreground, there is a dark flame-shaped tree. The swirling sky makes me think of time-lapse photos of the night sky. Because stars appear to move relative to the Earth in time-lapse, they create curving streaks of white against the dark sky. Combined with the blues of the painting, it makes me think of sitting on a hillside at night, peacefully watching the night pass.
And Andrew, a 20th century person just trying to keep up, wrote, this is a landscape, though it's one whose background, the sky, which fills the upper 2/3 of the painting, is its dominant part. Almost all the shapes in the painting are built up of short, thick strokes bundled together rather than blending. We are looking slightly downwards at a village. Very close, just off to our left, are two slender trees made of dark, writhing lines, so that their upward pointing branches look like black flames, one reaching almost to the top of the picture. In the middle distance is the village. Its buildings are lightly detailed blocks, with a few tidy rows of trees, each painted as a simple green arc. Beyond, there are rounded blue hills, like a set of low waves. Above them, a jumbled bank of whiteness might be clouds or a sleeping range of snow-covered mountains. Then there is the pulsating sky, also composed of many separate lines, rolling and spiraling in various shades of bright to pale blue. In the sky are 12 large, irregularly spaced, radiant circles, most with a dark spot at center, surrounded by a small yellow halo, and then by a much thicker ring built up of short white strokes. The biggest, in the upper right corner, has a larger central circle, most of it filled by a yellow crescent moon. Dividing the upper 8 circles from the lower 4 is a broad band of white cloud-like that rolls across the sky in a remarkable shape, a wave that almost knots itself in the center, but twists again and continues into yet another curl, like a long wing of pale hair. To me, this looks like a scene at dusk, with the beacons of night beginning to gather, perhaps under the influence of that extraordinary ghostly wing, twisting into a central yin-yang symbol above the earth.
Oh boy. Megan, who says, I am looking forward to a summer full of beach walks and gardening, says, this painting shows a huge night sky that overlooks a small town that is framed by hills. In the left foreground of the painting is the top of a large tree. Since it is nighttime, there is no color to the tree. It looks like a large black flame. It's not possible to see the trunk of the tree or any branches, just the crown of the tree sticking up into the sky. Everything else in the painting is in the background. Because of the large presence of the treetop, the town below appears very small. There are no lights on, as this painting was made before most people had electricity in their homes. The town looks very peaceful, but also vulnerable, as the night sky and the treetop are both much larger than the entire town. The main focus of the painting is the sky itself, which is painted in a swirl of different blues mixed together with shades of black and white. Each brushstroke is accented. There are many, many lines of different colors and strokes that all fit together in a swirl to make the sky. In the sky, there are 11 stars and a moon that are surrounded by radiating brushstrokes that are very peaceful, but constant. Because of the detailed brushstrokes, the painting almost looks like it is moving, alive. The stars and the moon are painted a very cheerful yellow. If the yellow was a sound, it would be like a child laughing or someone saying, I love you so much, to someone they care about deeply. It's a very good color, this yellow, and it makes me feel happier just looking at it. Around the stars and moon are lines of light, which show the energy and power radiating from within. If the lines that surround the stars could make a sound in this painting, they would be quietly vibrating the way a cell phone vibrates. A low humming surrounds each star and the moon and makes them feel alive. I love this painting very much. I consider it to be something sacred, not because it is religious in any way, but because it is regarded with great respect and reverence by people all over the world, both now and in the past. When I look at this painting, I think about all the other millions of people in the world who have seen this painting and felt moved by it. It helps me feel connected to universal human values and people I've never met. It is very helpful and positive. To me, this painting represents the best of what humanity can bring to the world. Beautiful works of art that connect us all together and help to make us more human, in touch with each other and the forces of life.
Rick, who says, I'm a retired filmmaker living on the Gulf Islands, wrote, interestingly, this painting is of a landscape at night. What appears to be a village, complete with the spire of a church, appears in the lower right of the frame. A tall coniferous-like tree rises on the left, almost to the top of the frame. Rounded hills border the far edge of the village. And then, fully justifying the Starry Night title, we have the night sky dominating 2/3 of the painting. And what a sky it is. Pale clouds stream across the horizon, just above the hills, or swirl in wave-like patterns across the center of the sky. A crescent moon shines like the sun from the top right of the frame, while a set of bright, vibrant stars complete the composition, spread like the many suns they are across the remainder of the sky. What makes this painting so remarkable is Van Gogh's use of light and color, rendered with the use of bold, daringly apparent brushstrokes throughout. This painting is all blues, greens, whites, and yellows, which is of course exactly the colors you might expect in a night landscape. It's just that Van Gogh delivers these colors with a vibrancy that makes the image both real and unreal at the same time. The moon and stars are presented with concentric circles of light surrounding them. The hills are strips of white and blue, the central clouds a giant coil. The genius of Van Gogh is that he sees like no one else has before or since. If we were to stand where he did when he created this work, we might see the same colors, but none of us would see the image he delivers. When he has delivered it, we all say, of course, that is all there. Why didn't we see it that way? His image brings forth color and light in a way that makes all of us feel more alive. We can't help but feel grateful.
Nice. Angela, a middle-aged mom with grown-up children who loves to buy material to paint trees and mountains with, but never quite finds the time to actually use them. I live in Squamish and I'm thankful every day for the beauty that surrounds me. And here's her take. I notice something different in this iconic picture every time I see it. As a child, I was quite frightened of the dark shapes in the foreground to the left of the picture, as I thought they looked like a spooky castle. But as I have grown and looked more closely at the painting, I realized they are in fact tall, dark trees that sit at the edge of a town that has a ghostly looking light-colored church at its center. The village, which has few lights on in windows, suggests to me that it is quite late and most have gone to bed. The village appears to be surrounded by green fields, which eventually lead to large, imposing dark blue mountains. For me, all this smaller detail, apart from the dark tree, goes unnoticed, as the cobalt blue and sunshine yellow sky draws your gaze to the top 3/4 of the painting. The dramatic night sky is painted with lots of small strokes, which, when I was young, I thought the picture was colored in using blue, yellow, and white coloring pencils. The crescent-shaped moon sits in the top right-hand corner and is completely surrounded by slightly mellower yellow glow. Again, with my child eyes, I had assumed that it was a full moon that had 11 other moons of various sizes scattered among 2 big entwined waves that sit slightly off-center to the right of the night sky. Through adult eyes, I now realize that the 11 moons are in fact stars that are shining brightly on a cloudy night, and the darkness of the sky is brightened to blue due to the brightness of the moon and the stars. As an adult, for the first time, I have noticed a deep band of the lighter yellow and light tones of blue and green that sits on top of the dark mountains, which leaves my adult mind pondering the question, are those the northern lights I see above this small village, or is this the glow of a larger town's lights on the other side of the mountains?
Our very last description comes from Hannah, who says, I love learning about art. Dynamic swirls of blue and yellow fill the sky. The town below is illuminated. A dark tree sits on the left side of the painting, enjoying the view. And Jessa, that's all we have.
Oh my goodness. I don't know about you, but I find so many of those descriptions so evocative. Like how people describe how they used to see them as children or how they see this painting now, or the colors. And I noticed a number of people mentioning how alive or how it seems like it's full of movement. And while we definitely hear about his struggles with mental health in the last year or two of his life, what he's known for and what he's beloved for today is the way he brings movement and vibration and color and imagination to the way that he sees the world. So, oh my goodness, yeah, quite a number of those descriptions. I was like, that's a beautiful way of describing Starry Night.
It's really great to get such a variety of folks' perspectives, and to see where, again, this is the beauty of crowdsourced description, is where the overlaps are, where the similarities are, where the differences are, and then the impact it has on the person who's witnessing it. I acknowledge we have a hand from Julia. So Julia, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Those were lovely, lovely descriptions. And I seem to remember from hearing about this installation, the Imagine van Gogh installation, that there were also some pictures about the actual places, and photographs of the actual places that he painted. And I'm wondering if there's one of Starry Night, because when I've always looked at this, it's always seemed to me that the stars, we were almost viewing them through like sort of a frosted window or an ice covered window that has that effect of kind of amplifying the light around it. But that, of course, the village itself doesn't is not in that same world. It's they're almost two different worlds. And I was just wondering if maybe he would, if he was in this mental hospital, was he actually painting it from inside a room, looking out through a window? And do we have, does that place, that mental hospital still stand, or just what you might know about that?
Great questions, Julia. Yes, the mental hospital in Arles, where he stayed for a year after the ear incident, it still stands. You can walk around the courtyard where he used to paint. So I went there a couple of years ago when I was in Provence. I was like, this is where he stayed. And curiously, I love that you're asking about, do we know where he painted this painting? Because there is actually a quote from his letters to his brother, where he was telling him, saying, "This morning I saw the countryside from my window a long time before sunrise, with nothing but the morning star," which looked very big. And so he's referring to the asylum is called St. Paul, and he's talking about seeing the stars in the sky from the window of his room. So I don't know if he painted it with the window closed or open, but thankfully we do actually have a quote from one of his letters where he talks about the memory of seeing that light in the sky and the stars in the village, and that then led him to paint it in his own way.
Thanks for the question, Julia. Tilo's got a hand. Tilo and Yuko have a hand, so it'll be one or the other. I'll let them unmute themselves. And we gotcha.
Hi, this is Tilo. Some years ago, I went through a tour at Oakridge Mall, and it had Van Gogh's paintings, but they were in 3D and they were in felt. And they were going across Canada, and they were raising money for to help keep the restorations of the paintings, and they wanted for each one, even though it was a replica on that, they wanted $20,000 for the painting.
Wow.
But it was quite interesting that I could actually touch them in that, and they were quite large, these particular paintings.
I thought I paid a lot when I spent 17 euros on my sunflowers postcard. I call it a postcard, large postcard. So that's a lot, Tilo.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. But it was quite interesting. And then I was thinking to myself, even if I had the money and bought one of them or two of them, I haven't got enough room to put the painting in for the walls. They were just huge, massive.
And that's probably exactly why they're 20K, right? Because you're expecting a corporation to buy it. You're expecting it to be the art in, the hallway of an office building or something like that. That's right. Yeah. They're catering to a totally different crowd.
And they're fundraising to restore the originals. So yes, hopefully
they were. That's what the whole reason was doing it. So.
Tilo, if you ever get to travel, the Palace of Versailles in Paris also has felt images, reproductions of like paintings of King Louis, for example. And so you can feel like the cape of his cape is in, like in a faux fur, and they're really quite interesting, and they travel all over Europe with these accessible images of some of those
I'd love to see those.
Palace in Versailles. But anytime you plan to go, double check, because when I went, it's like, sorry, those felt paintings, they're not paintings, but those felt portraits are now in, Italy, because they've taken them to Italy.
You got to find where they are.
You got to know when where they're going to be. So,
okay.
But it's a real cool tactile experience, and they weren't huge. Yeah. They were, like an 8,
a sheet of paper.
Yeah. Very cool stuff. Thanks for your question.
Very much. You're welcome.
Folks, anybody who has last questions for Jessa before we let her go, Jessa, I'd love for you to share with us the story of the ear, because that's the story we all hear, no pun intended. Yeah. And I'd love to know how that story goes.
Yeah. So what we can tell from Van Gogh is he was a bit eccentric. He was finding the career jobs for him in his 20s, changing jobs a lot, and eventually really wanted to be an artist when he was 27, and then working for 10 years. But the mental health issues really came into play only really in the last 2 or 3 years of his life. And so what had happened was he was in southern France, loving the light, loving the color, painting. A friend of his who was an artist had come to live with him. He really wanted to have an art community down there, but him and his friend were fighting a lot, and his friend was going to leave. And in a episode of delusion or confusion, we're not sure, but he cut off his left ear, and then he took it to a prostitute and asked her to keep it for safekeeping. So nothing about that is a great decision. And so he was in a hospital getting bandaged up afterwards, and he didn't really remember what had happened and why he did it. So it was really like a mental episode that he didn't really have a lot of memories of. But after that, he checked into the hospital in Arles for a year, and painting daily was a part of his therapy and his health. And in his letters to his brother, he was saying, my health is great. As for the head, we just have patience and hope. And so he was lucid and very aware of his mental health. And he says that being in the hospital also helped him not be afraid of mental health, but really see it as any other disease. And so he was in that hospital for about a year. And then the last year of his life, he was living outside of Paris in a small town. And one of his friends was a doctor in case he needed some support, but he was just painting every single day. And people think about the ear, and they think about that he killed himself. But as I was looking into things, it's interesting because some people talk about him shooting himself in the chest and then dying a couple days later. But there is definitely other stories that talk about people who have come forward who were teenagers in that town during that time, and they claim that they were playing with guns and playing like Buffalo Bill games, and their gun went off, and he was painting in the field, and he was hit by a stray bullet, and that he said that it had been self-inflicted so that the boys wouldn't get in trouble for playing with guns and injuring somebody. And there's no suicide notes. Like he'd actually ordered a bunch of art supplies like that day. So as I've been looking into it, like it was possibly self-inflicted, but it could have also been an accident. So there's no definitive evidence that it was suicide, but the ear and that together have kind of created this tortured artist story, which is somewhat true, but it's not the full story. So I think it's interesting looking into some of these famous artists. And as you look at letters and more stories, people who knew that person, etc., there's more than just kind of the pop culture rumors of ears and things. There's more layers to it. So I hope that looking at some of the works today have helped us see the color and the energy and the movement and the imagination that he brought to his painting above and beyond his mental issues. And for him, painting was a way of kind of getting it all out. And so he created these very vibrant works during what was a hard time, but also, for 10 years, he was creating prolifically.
And I'll make a quick statement, and then we'll call on Barbara, who has her hand up. But knowing I'm kind of I have an interest in forensic science, and so I'm a little bit of a nerd. I also have an interest in medical stuff, so I'm a bit of a nerd that way too. But it's very difficult to give yourself a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. It's almost, it's almost impossible to do that, especially when you consider the kind of guns they'd have in 1888 and the size of those guns, to be able to turn it and point it to yourself and get it around. So, I find that story interesting about the stray bullet, because for me, it's much more plausible, but it also reinforces the idea of how easily our mind goes to these places, right? Barbara, you have a hand.
Yes, I have a statement, a comment, and then also a question. One, Steve Wynn, who is also visually impaired. He put his elbow through a Van Gogh painting that was worth over $100 million one time. I don't know if you guys know that. It was going to be auctioned, and he didn't realize he has RP, so he doesn't have peripheral vision, and he just kind of stuck his elbow into the painting and pretty much wrecked it.
Restoration can work miracles. I'm sure they fixed it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they fixed it. My other question is about the stars. I never noticed the thing about the white. So with the white around the stars, is that almost like a halo kind of thing?
Yeah. So it's like whether it was the air or whether his imagination, but he saw it like white, little circular broken brushstrokes radiating around each star, like a halo or like a glow that sort of he painted in around each star.
I was having a conversation with my mother about this, actually, how this, like Starry Nights, if it was a texture, how would we describe that? And so we're having this great conversation about this because we came up with this analogy of threads of yarn. So if you can consider taking several threads of a length of yarn, different shades of blue, different shades of green, different shades of white, and bundle them up so that they're all kind of intertwined with each other. It's kind of the way that these brush strokes are. They kind of layer, but they're kind of differentiated, but they kind of layer. And then if you were to take that length of string, that bunch of string, and curl it in onto itself, kind of like the way a snail shell would be, it makes this swirl. And so it really solidified in my mind. So even with the stars, these brush strokes are like, it feels like this ball of twine, yarn, and all these colors that are, because that's what happens is, they don't stay linear, they mix and they mingle and they braid themselves together, they weave themselves together. So I thought that really solidified to me when she was like trying to explain that to me. And that was when we were in the Van Gogh Museum, and I was reminded of that again when this project came up. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but it certainly helped me in that moment. Myra has a hand. So Myra, will let you ask your question or share your comment.
Yes, first I want to say this has just been a fabulous evening and the descriptions are terrific. I'm curious about two things. Well, curious about one thing. Did he entitle or title his paintings at all, or how many of them have a title? That was my one question. And the other comment was with Tim's question about, how did he become so famous or whatever. It brought to my mind so many musicians that have not been appreciated during their lifetime, and then after they pass on, we love them. So I'll mute myself again, but if somebody could talk about titles, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Myra.
I mean, I haven't found all 2,000 of his works yet, but the ones that I have seen, like in researching or in person, they have titles. So I haven't seen him say untitled. Like his self-portraits are self-portrait 1887, but I've seen him title everything else. Sometimes when an artist does not title their work, it's because they don't want to shape your thinking. They just want to give you your own experience. I'm not going to tell you anything to shape your mind. Whereas he wants us to really, I guess, focus on the starry sky. So he calls it Starry Night. So as far as I could tell, he seems to name his works. And
each one of them has a signature on them?
Ooh, I haven't looked in all the corners, but I mean, lots of them have been signed. I'm not sure if they're signed on the front or the back, but also if he died before a lot of them were sold, many artists would sign a work when it was going to be sold. So I can't promise that he signed everything, but his brother took care of all that estate afterwards.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, his use of color, makes him beloved. It was radical for its time, but he just loved pure, vibrant color and intense energy and all that. So just like experimental music, he was experimental with color and brushstrokes. And there have been artists after him that have that he has inspired, right? That have taken what he started, and that's the progression of art, which is one of the things that's really exciting about this. Is even when you look back, Emily Carr, beloved modern painter of British Columbia here, she was inspired by Van Gogh when she saw his work in 1912 in Paris, when she wanted to absorb all the modern French ideas. So many artists after Van Gogh or after Monet, or many of these artists we talk about today, they looked at them as their teachers, and then they took color in a new direction in the 20th century. So he definitely inspired a lot of people to paint vibrations or movement or feelings or mental health and channel it into their painting, or use bright yellows and bright whites, don't make things realistic. So he really, in making painting his own way, I think he also showed people that they could maybe be more experimental in their own way in the years after he died. It kind of reminds me of what you had said when we looked at the Jackson Pollocks in the first crowdsourcing, which is, being the trailblazer of your time and not being appreciated for what you're doing because it was like too risky, too experimental, nobody's ever seen this before. How dare you, right? And then how much we look back on this as the progression of art history and where it fits into our into that landscape. And he knew that people thought that he was a nobody. He knew people didn't like his work. And then I just want to finish with a really short bit with one of his letters to Theo. And he was saying, like, do you think I'm an unpleasant person, a nobody? All right, then, well, even if that were absolutely true, then one day I should like to show by my work what such a non-entity, such a nobody has in his heart. So,
Oh, that gave me chills.
right?
Little goosebumps.
Right?
He foreshadowed his own legacy.
He's like, I want them to see, look past the crazy, and see what I want to show the world.
Oh, I love that. With that, Jessa, I want to thank you so much for taking us through this tour. It's been really interesting and informational, and the descriptions, the crowd. Thank you for those on the line if you participated in the crowdsourced description. But of course, before we let you walk away, we have a draw that we have to honor every week. And so if you're on the line still and you are somebody who identifies with blindness or partial sight, you are entered into the draw. And we'll bring Sarah out because Sarah is going to help administer this fancy draw. Hey, Jessa, have you thought of a buzzword that you can yell out spontaneously?
Yes.
Okay.
I have it.
I'm excited to hear what it is.
You're gonna like it.
Sarah, are you with us?
Yes, I'm over here. So Jessa, whenever you're ready, please let me know your word.
Sunflower.
Ooh, nice one.
Like it.
Our winner is Myra.
Ooh, Myra, congratulations.
Oh, but I've already won a prize, so I'd like you to put it back and have somebody else win, please. I just won, a month ago.
Well, that's very generous of you, Myra. Thank you for making space for others. Sarah, let's you and Jessa do another draw.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Jessa.
Stars.
Okay, I have Ellen Couch.
Ellen, see, that's Ellen, fantastic. We've got Ellen on the line with us still, I think. Find Ellen.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, Ellen's
Hang
there.
on.
Wonderful, Ellen. Excited. We'll make sure that we connect
surprise.
with you offline to get you your prize.
Yeah, well, I'm in Wisconsin, so
I know.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're trying to make things local to folks, so that's why I didn't announce what the prize is because
yeah,
if it was
no,
a
I
Canadian
know.
prize,
But
you couldn't use it. So yeah, we'll connect with you about getting you your prize offer.
yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I don't have a working computer at the moment, so it's my phone number.
Great.
Which I think you may have, right? Maybe you don't.
I think we should have that. Yes.
Yeah.
If we don't, next week I'll prompt you for it.
Okay, it's a deal. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ellen. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, friends. Well, with our sincere thanks to Jessa and to Jiten and to Eileen, I will wish you all a wonderful evening. Whether you'd like to turn in and go to bed, have a hot toddy, or I'm going to leave the line open for another 15 minutes or ish, just to do some social chit chat if you want to stick around and chit chat. So that'll conclude the formal part of our informal evening.